everyone, and welcome to the Debrief on ABC News Live. I'm Kimberly Brooks. Thanks so much for joining us. We have updates on the massive protest in Hong Kong. Plus, O.J. Simpson has joined Twitter, and we continue to celebrate Pride Month. Taylor Swift doing it big for the community and dropping a hot new single. But first, here are your headlines.
Severe weather leaving a path of destruction from Texas to Pennsylvania. Wind gusts up to 70 miles per hour, tearing off this roof in Fort Worth, tossing this helicopter on its side at the Aviation Museum. In Oklahoma, twin landspouts spotted outside Oklahoma City, triggering tornado warnings around the town of Omega. At least 20 tornadoes reported in the region over the last 2 days.
At the Paris Air Show today, an apology from Boeing executive Kevin McAllister, saying he's sorry to airlines and victims' families of the 737 MAX planes that crashed in Indonesia and Ethiopia. That after an investigation pointed to pilots unable to override a software issue that drove the noses of the planes down.
The tragedy of the Lion Air and Ethiopian accidents certainly weighs on all of us, and words simply cannot express the sorrow and the sympathy that we feel for the families and the loved ones of those that were lost in these tragic accidents. These accidents have only intensified our efforts to ensure the highest level of safety and quality in everything we do.
Boeing is working on a software fix.
Gloria Vanderbilt has died at the age of 95. She was an American actress, heiress, and designer. Her collections included clothing, jewelry, perfumes, shoes, leather goods, and home furnishings. Gloria Vanderbilt is the mother of CNN News anchor Anderson Cooper.
We begin with our ABC News exclusive, George Stephanopoulos sitting down with President Trump. That interview continuing to make headlines. I want to bring in Karen Travers at the White House to discuss. Karen, what are your top takeaways from this interview?
I think a couple of things, Kimberly. I think first, that incredible statement from the president last week about accepting political research from Russia or China. That's what George Stephanopoulos asked the president about. And the president, when he responded, said that he would maybe turn it over to the FBI or reach out to the FBI and also look at it, take a listen and see what these countries were offering. But in that answer, Kimberly, the president did not talk about Russia or China, of course, adversaries of the U.S., but mentioned Norway. That if they called or said they had something, you would entertain it. So that, of course, got a lot of headlines here in Washington last week and still is having a lot of ramifications today. I think the other thing that we saw over the weekend, the president saying that they're parting ways, his campaign, his re-election campaign, with several of his team's pollsters right now because of leaks of internal polling. George Stephanopoulos presented the president with some numbers that show him trailing Joe Biden in some critical early voting states or battleground states. And the president said that the polls don't exist. He says he's not trailing Joe Biden. Well, I think the reaction by his campaign this week to get rid of some of his pollsters shows that perhaps the president there was not being forthcoming with George, and that the polling numbers as we've seen them are accurate.
Yeah, pretty interesting. He also expressed his willingness to tackle health care again.
Yeah, this was an interesting statement from the president because this came up a couple months ago when the president said that the Republicans needed to push forward on health care, that he was going to put out a plan and make it a big part of his re-election message. Well, Kimberly, the president is launching that re-election campaign tomorrow night with a big rally in Florida, and he says that he will be putting out a health care plan in the coming weeks, maybe within 2 months. Republicans are not going to leap and stand behind him on this. It was early April when Senator Mitch McConnell, the Republican leader in the Senate, said very clearly that the Senate will not be taking up health care. The president wants to do it. Go ahead, send Congress legislation. We're told this morning that what the president is talking about is not an actual bill, but a set of principles that he'd like to see for health care legislation. I think unless he puts things down in a bill-like form, this is not going to go anywhere right now.
All right, Karen Travers at the White House, thank you for the updates. And guys, if you missed the interview, we have you covered. The full interview will re-air all day today on ABC News Live, so make sure you check it out. And we're going to move on to Iran. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo doing his best to convince Asian and European leaders that Iran was responsible for 2 oil tanker attacks in the Gulf of Oman last week. He's saying it's a problem for the entire international community and not just the United States. So I want to bring in Louis Martinez at the Pentagon. Louis, why does Mike Pompeo have to convince leaders of this? Do they not believe that Iran was responsible for it?
Kimberly, I think what's going on here is that Pompeo needs to make a solid case to these American allies in Europe and in Asia that Iran is truly responsible. We saw this grainy footage that was released last week that showed Iranian mariners trying to remove a magnetic mine that had been placed. It was an unexploded one on the side of one of those tankers. The United States seeing that as conclusive proof. Some allies see it as well. Britain and Saudi Arabia see that's the case, but Japan and Germany taking it more of a hesitant attitude. I think that's because they don't want to create a scenario for potential conflict in the region. They want to be solid that this is actually the case, that Iran is responsible for it. And they also want to see international action. They want to see some kind of an international investigation, so kind of diffusing tensions. But Pompeo saying that there is lots of evidence that Iran is behind this, that there's more intelligence that the United States is going to be releasing soon. We know that he was burning up the phones over the weekend in contact with some of his allied partners, trying to make the case. It's possible we may be seeing more evidence this week, but it's kind of a tough slog for the United States so far in trying to build international consensus that Iran was truly behind this.
And yeah, in the meantime, Iran has said it will exceed its uranium stockpile limit originally set by the nuclear deal in the next 10 days. So what do we make of that?
Yeah, that is another shot across the bow from Iran. Of course, this whole scenario between the United States and Iran has lasted decades, but it was Iran's nuclear program that was defused about 4 years ago with this denuclearization plan involving Iran, that they would not exceed certain limits. Well, now they're saying that they are going to exceed some of the limits for low-enriched uranium that they were set by that accord. What we do know is that the United States, under the Trump administration, backed out of that plan. But this is not just a U.S. and Iran agreement. This is an agreement between the 5 permanent members of the UN and Security Council, as well as European and Germany. And so they are also key players in this. But when the United States backed out of it, Iran threatened that they would reciprocate, and I think we're seeing that now.
All right, Louis Martinez at the Pentagon. Thank you for the updates. We appreciate you joining us. And guys, as you know, we've been covering the protest in Hong Kong, people out in the streets to defend their autonomy, and massive crowds. On Sunday, 2 million of the 7 million people total in Hong Kong were in the streets. So today, protesters left the streets to avoid clashing with police again and moved to areas near the city's headquarters. So I want to bring in Bob Woodruff, who's on the ground in Hong Kong. Bob, can you just give us an idea? Can you just set the scene for us?
Well, right behind, actually going to hear some chanting going on right now. These are some of the protesters that are gathered right in front of the chief executive's office here. You know, Carrie Lam. These protesters are just furious about her. She did give an apology about how she has handled these events. Certainly the way that the police actually reacted to these protesters, especially on Wednesday, when they came back with a little bit of violence against the people, and they called it a riot back then. The students were furious about that as well, because this was not a riot in their mind. In fact, today, that was actually now upgraded or downgraded to not call it a riot, but simply just basically a slight uprising against or some action by the students on the streets. So things are changing. It's a lot more calm than it was before. You're absolutely right, Kimberly, that this was one of the most amazing marches through a city that I've ever seen before. You know, if you look at the population of Hong Kong, there's about less than 8 million people living here. This was 2 million people. If you look at this in the United States, if you look at the ratio of population, that would be like 85 million Americans coming as protests and march around the country to resist part of its policy. So this has been a huge event here here in Hong Kong. But, you know, this is a town. It's a financial city. No one here likes these kinds of these crises to rip through the streets and then upset the markets. So this is one that's a lot of the business people came forward to Carrie Lam later on and started to oppose this movement, this possible law that they wanted to pass. And now it's a little bit back to normal. Now the big step is what's going to happen next.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. What is going to happen next? I mean, do you think that all of this protesting, are they making progress in what they want to achieve?
Well, they've achieved something already. I mean, just to get the executive, the chief executive actually to change a direction here, but it's partly because what the business leaders did come forward and said maybe we should not do this right now. But a lot of this was because of the students. Things really triggered this. I mean, certainly was what the military, what the police did in the first 2 of the last week. There's been actually 3 complete demonstrations out here on the streets in the past week, and what the police did certainly upset the students, and that started to change things. Also, there was one very, very sad situation was that there was one 35-year-old protester who actually fell off the scaffolding in front of one of the malls. Oh, wow. And died. And now if you look all over the city, you see flowers that people laid out on the side. There's posters up, certainly criticizing the leadership here, but also honoring this young man who actually sacrificed his life as a protester. And this has also brought more of these students out on the streets. So this number doubled from the previous Sunday. Yesterday, 2 million. A week earlier, that was 1 million. So these students are really active. I don't think they're going to give up until they get something. And certainly they're just calling right now for her resignation. They want her out, and they said they're not going to leave until this actually happens. Well, whether that will happen or not, that's really up in the air.
All right, they are not backing down. Bob Woodruff, right there on the ground in Hong Kong. Thank you so much for joining us. And guys, we want to keep you updated on the crisis in Sudan. There was essentially a revolution 2 months ago. Sudanese people coming out in droves demanding President Omar al-Bashir step down after a very repressive 30-year rule. The military responded and they ousted him and put him in jail. Now, a reminder, al-Bashir was in power during the genocide in Darfur and continued to rule after hundreds of thousands of people were slaughtered. So he's gone, and now the people want an election and a transition to civilian rule. They want democracy, except now the military has taken control and they're acting like the dictator the people just overthrew, and the military won't relinquish their power. So more protests came, civil disobedience, bringing all businesses across the country to a halt. And the military response, more violence, a massacre of over 100 people who died, and according to local doctors, close to 100 women were raped. So I want to bring in Cameron Hume. He's a former ambassador to Algeria, South Africa, and Indonesia, and former top diplomat to Sudan. Cameron, first, thanks for joining us so much today. I think many times people feel like since this crisis is happening far away in a different country that it doesn't affect them, or it's not something that we should be paying attention to. But in your opinion, what should people know and stay focused on?
Well, I think what they should know is that, as you pointed out, this government has been involved in a number of problems over the last 30 years. And in particular, I'd look at 2 things. One is terrorism questions. We've long had a terrorism disputes with Sudan and a terrorism dialogue and terrorism cooperation, and that's been our main policy point. And the other is Darfur. I served there while the Darfur crisis was on, and we got it to end. But the people who were involved in the violence in Darfur are still in the government. It wasn't just Omar al-Bashir. It was other people, and actually I think some of them have acquired more power since then. So I would worry about the potential for a lot more violence than what you saw recently.
And we've seen this many times where militaries take over after a coup and things don't go well. Why is it so hard for the military to relinquish power when they agreed to oust the president? The protest happened, they kicked him out, and now they won't give the power up.
Well, it wasn't just a one-man rule. These people ruled with Bashir. And they looked at, it's like a ship, and they saw the ship was going to a bad place, so they threw the captain overboard. But the same people have their hands on the tiller. And in particular, the force which has come to the fore, this RSF, that is commanded by a person who was in charge of many of the operations in Darfur. And so it's not as if Bashir was gone and everybody now is sweetness and light.
Exactly, yes. So I just want to get your opinion on if you think that this will turn into something, anything will change, because an envoy was sent over. Do you think that that's been successful so far?
Yeah, I think it's a good step that we've re-engaged after not paying enough attention. That's good. However, I think that coming out of that and saying we want a full investigation, that's a good thing, but that's not going to help the people who are in Khartoum and in the streets next week. The government there is heavily supported by Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and also to some extent Egypt. These are countries we have close relations with, and there is no convincing evidence that we have opened a senior-level dialogue that would really get the attention of the rulers in Saudi Arabia and UAE, who support this, not only the government, but they support this rapid support force by hiring them to fight in Yemen. So there's a big international connection there, and while the visit of the Assistant Secretary to Khartoum was a good step forward, I think we have to take steps with the people who are actually supporting the government.
All right, Cameron Hume in our D.C. Bureau, thank you so much, and we'll continue to keep everyone updated as this develops. Thank you for joining us.
Good, thanks.
And guys, we move on to a disturbing story in Phoenix. The mayor of that city now apologizing to the city after this video is released showing police officers pointing their guns and threatening to shoot a 22-year-old father who was with his pregnant fiance. Police say they were investigating allegations that one of the children had shoplifted a doll from a Family Dollar store. So I want to go to John Genovese. He's with KNXV TV in Phoenix. John, how does something like this happen? This is bizarre. It's crazy.
Yeah, well, Kimberly, certainly a lot of outrage both in Phoenix and now across the country since this video has gone viral, and really since this all came to light last week when the family filed a $10 million claim against the city of Phoenix alleging civil rights violations. But here's what we know. Back on May 29th, they were shopping at a dollar store. They left, and their 4-year-old daughter reportedly stole a doll from the dollar store. And the parents say, unbeknownst to them, they took off with it, drove away. Police then tracked them down to where they were at their babysitter's apartment complex. And that's kind of where this video picks up, this video recorded by a witness in that area. And you can see police removing that father, a 22-year-old, from the car, physically restraining him, appearing to use force to almost kick him. At one point, he almost falls to the ground. At the same time, they are yelling profane statements to this pregnant mother inside, holding on to her 1-year-old, that 4-year-old also inside the car. And this goes on for several minutes. Now, one of the big discrepancies we found between that video and the police report is that many things were simply missing. Those officers did not report some of that force that they took against that father. They didn't include those profane statements they were making to that mother and to their daughters. At one point, their guns were drawn at this mother and father and these 2 young girls. And so that's what's really sparked a lot of the outrage now that we're seeing over this, to the point where over the weekend, both the police chief and the Phoenix mayor, again, apologizing to the community, promising that there will be a full investigation into this. Tomorrow night at a local church here, they're holding a community meeting, trying to solicit feedback from folks and kind of calm a lot of the anxiety and nerves that are out there. So certainly there's a lot more yet to come out. We know the family is holding another press conference this morning about all this, but certainly a lot of folks very upset, including the chief and other city officials here, about what they saw in that video.
All right, John Genovese right there in Phoenix. Thank you so much. Deeply disturbing video to watch. Unfortunately, happens too often. Thanks for joining us. Guys, so let's talk about who just signed up for Twitter over the weekend. O.J. Simpson, 628,000 followers with a bio that says, "If you don't see it here, I didn't say it." So let's take a listen to his first video message.
Hey, Twitter world, this is yours truly. Now, coming soon to Twitter, you'll get to read all my thoughts and opinions on just about everything. Now, there's a lot of fake OJ accounts out there, so this one, at the real OJ32, is the only official one. So this should be a lot of fun. I got a little getting even to do. So God bless. Take care.
All right. And this Monday happens to be 25 years to the day of OJ's infamous Bronco chase. So I want to bring in Jim Avila, who is live in Los Angeles. Jim, thanks for being with us. But before we talk about the Bronco chase, I want to get your thoughts on OJ joining Twitter.
Well, you remember that in that Bronco chase, there were 95 million people who tuned in. So there are a lot of people who are interested in O.J. Simpson, and he's captured already 600 and some thousand people. As I said on his Twitter feed, that's probably more people following him today than followed him during the Bronco chase. It'll be interesting to see if he ever tweets as well about, I'm waiting to see if he tweets about how the search for the real killers is going, that he promised he would be doing after he was acquitted.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. And let's talk about the chase, because that was, like you said, 95 million people watching on televisions, a very big moment. You were covering it at the time. What moment sticks with you?
Well, at the time of this chase, just before it, I was at the police headquarters here, was then called the Parker Center in downtown Los Angeles. And that's, in fact, the picture of me at the Parker Center that day. And what was happening is that the police department had announced that O.J. Simpson had reneged on an agreement to turn himself in. And they announced, much to the shock of everybody in that room, that O.J. Simpson was a fugitive from justice and that he had missed 3 appointments, including his arraignment, to show up that day. And the next thing we knew, the next we heard was that he was, in fact, in the back of that Bronco you're seeing there. And he was on a cell phone. His friend, A.C. Coleman, was driving. And he was supposedly on the way down to go to the grave of Nicole Brown Simpson, is what he kept telling police. However, he was also southbound on the 405, which leads to Mexico. So nobody was ever sure exactly where he was going to go. And he was threatening suicide. He was apologizing for his relationship with Nicole. He just did everything but confess to the murder during that ride, and then finally gave himself up at the home in Brentwood.
Yeah, and so now that it's 25 years later, you know, some people aren't old enough, you know, some of the generations aren't old enough to remember it, but I think it's one of those moments where everyone can remember where they were when it was happening. So, Jim, thank you so much for joining us. Pretty iconic to see that footage again. Thank you.
Sure.
All right, guys, and we move on to Toronto. The city celebrating their NBA champions today, the Toronto Raptors, in a victory parade with crowds of nearly 2 million people. So I want to bring in ESPN's Michelle Steele right there in Toronto. Michelle, just give us an idea of what the energy's like.
As you can imagine, people are going bonkers. I was here over the weekend after Game 6. The buzz was palpable everywhere you went in Toronto. Raptors fever certainly is not an understatement. Everywhere you went, you saw signs, you saw shirts, you saw hats. There was an apparel store selling championship gear. The line was 2 to 3 hours long every single day. So you can imagine what the mood is like right now. We're only about an hour away from the team actually arriving to this square for the championship rally. There are people in every direction, Kimberly, for as far as you can see, and people are climbing every single thing they can climb on to get a view of their beloved team, Kimberly.
I have a question for you. As we know, Drake is a super fan. Have you spotted him out in that crowd anywhere?
Kimberly, not only have we seen Drake, he's got his own double-decker bus with a couple of other star players. As we know, he's a global ambassador. but they were showing an airplane circling the city. And I turned to a producer here and said, oh, that must be the Prime Minister's plane, because we're expecting Justin Trudeau to make an appearance at this rally as well. And he said, no, that's actually Drake's plane. Drake has his own airplane, and he is so hyped about today's championship parade. He's got a plane circling the greater Toronto area. That's how excited he is.
Oh my gosh, Michelle, well, have a good time. We know this is a huge victory for the city, so enjoy yourselves. Thank you. All right, guys, and we continue to cover Pride Month all of June, and in celebration of the World Pride and the 50th anniversary of the Stonewall riots, New York City, along with MasterCard, just unveiled an all-inclusive street sign. So our Toni Morrison is right there with all of the details. Toni, can you just tell us exactly where you are and what's going on?
Yeah, well, you know what? You are right on. The month is Pride, the energy is electric, and the street here, gay. Take a look right behind me. The popular and historic Christopher Street at Gay Street in the West Village neighborhood of Manhattan is now Acceptance Street. Take a look at the video. This reveal just happened not even an hour ago.
That's pretty awesome. That's pretty awesome. So it has all of the signs there. What does this change represent? Why did they want to do this now?
Yeah, well, we can, look what Gay Street is joined by. I'm just going to step back up here. Hi, Angeline, my camera woman extraordinaire back here. So Gay Street is now joined by Lesbian Street, Bisexual Street, Trans Street, Queer Street, Intersex Street, Asexual Street, Non-Binary Street, Pansexual Street, Two-Spirit Street, and etc. Street. I really wanted to name everything top to bottom there for you, just to hammer home the messaging of this. It's a project that was championed by the New York City Commission on Human Rights in partnership, underwritten by MasterCard here in the city, along with several New York City organizations and offices. The message: acceptance matters. And this Pride Month, that's the message we're trying to drive home. If you come down here to the newly unveiled Acceptance Street, you are welcome, no matter who you love and how you love.
I absolutely love that. And we have to talk quickly about the surprise guest at Stonewall over the weekend, Taylor Swift, right? Yes, let's take a look at that.
Oh my God.
Amazing, and she did this along with dropping a new single that was also very inclusive. Toni, what'd you think of that new video?
Oh man, I am so into it. There's a lot of hype, a lot of buzz, all for the right reasons for this video for Taylor. You know, and it really, my takeaway from that video is that we can be allies, but what the LGBTQ plus community needs is more than just allies. They need really accomplices and kind of their mission for acceptance and equality. So that's really the next, I guess, this next phase or wave of understanding, more than just tolerance. This event could have been in the name of tolerance not too long ago, but today it's in the name of acceptance, and I think this lines up with Taylor's video more than perfectly this Pride Month.
All right, Toni Morrison right there in New York City by Stonewall with the new street. Thank you so much for joining us. And guys, we're going to be covering Pride all month, and we're going to have a special Pride coverage that begins at 11 a.m. on Sunday, June 30th. So make sure you check that out. So guys, continue to take care of yourselves. And if you're around, you can stick around for the briefing room at 3:30 p.m. and then check out World News Prime at 8 p.m. And then you can stay updated on all of these headlines at abcnews.com or download the app. I'm Kimberly Brooks, and I'll see you tomorrow.
ABC News, straightforward.